All right, we're recording.
Thank you. We got one more coming in the lobby. Okay, so I would like to call this meeting to order. Today is January 28th, and this is the Hartford Subcommittee of the MARB. I'm Kimberly Kennison. I'm the designee for OPM Secretary McCaw. With me today is Christine Shaw. She is the designee for Treasurer Wooden. And so this is our second time showing a video with our meeting, and the first one, I happened to be the one who had technical difficulties, but I'm glad I didn't have them today. And it is so great to see everybody in person. It's been a long time, so we're excited to be offering it today in video, but keep in mind that will also bring some challenges. So I would ask that, if you're not speaking, please put your microphones on mute, the audio, and at times if we have some internet connectivity issues, it is helpful also if you turn off the video if you're not speaking. But I'm not asking you to do that. I just want to be cognitive of if we start to lose connectivity or delays in people speaking. So but we do want to make sure that we don't have background noise during this meeting. And we do have a quorum today, so we can get on with the, that's my opening remarks. But before I do that, Christine, do you have any opening remarks as well?
I do not, but thank you, Ms. Kennison.
You bet. Then we'll move on to the second item on our agenda today, which is the approval of the minutes. We actually have two sets of minutes that need to be approved, and I am looking for a motion to approve the October 22nd regular meeting minutes. If I could get one, please.
Bob White, so
I'll make
moved.
that motion, and I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, can we get a roll call vote, please? And please state whether you're in favor, opposed, or abstain.
Mr. Brockman,
Favor. Aye.
Mr. White,
In favor.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Yes.
Ms. Shaw,
Yes, in favor.
and Ms. Kennison.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you. Our minutes have been approved. Now we'll move on for a motion to approve the minutes from the December 10th special meeting of Hartford. And if I could get a motion.
Bob White, so moved.
Thank you.
Mark, second.
Thank you, Mark. Any discussion, please? Then I will ask for a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Brockman,
Aye.
Mr. White,
Aye.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Aye.
Ms. Shaw,
Aye.
Ms. Kennison.
Aye.
Are there any other subcommittee members who are on the line and would like to vote on the minutes of the December 10th special meeting?
Yes, Steve Falsick now. Sorry, I was
In favor?
Thank you.
I'm in favor.
Okay,
If
thank
have me
you.
registered then as attending. I just joined.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so the minutes from the December 10th special meeting have all been approved. We will now move on to agenda item number 3, and that is to review and discuss the fiscal 20 audit and financial results. Mayor, do you or Leanne have any comments that you would like or opening remarks before we turn it over to your auditors?
Thank you. I don't have any opening remarks. Leanne, anything you'd like to say before we turn it over to the auditors?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. It was a very challenging year for my team with all that was going on with the pandemic and then the unexpected ransomware attack that we experienced back in September, but my team was strong and we were able to pull through and file on time. And I'd like to thank Bloom Shapiro, now CLA. I would like to thank them for their partnership in helping us get over the line.
Very good. Oh, echo. That might, oh. So thank you, Leanne, and congratulations on the success of getting your audit done and done timely. And I do know that you had some challenges there. So we're glad to hear that you were able to do that and that your team came together. Let's have Bloom /CLA come forth. We have us today with us is Vanessa Rosado and Leslie Zoll and Dan Smith. Who will be starting? Leslie or Vanessa?
This is
Can you-
Vanessa Rosito.
Can you guys see my screen now?
We can.
Okay, we're going to have Vanessa start.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. So Leslie, you can flip to the next slide just to go over the agenda. So I'll start out the presentation this morning. I'll talk about the terms of the engagement and the executive summary. I'll turn it over to Leslie. She'll go over some high-level financial highlights, and then Dan Smith will go over the federal and state single audit and governance communication. And then I'll wrap it up with the laundry list of upcoming GASB pronouncements and also talk about CLA a little bit and answer any questions that you may have. And if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to try to stop one of us. Okay?
Okay.
Great, thanks. So as far as the terms of the engagement, we were engaged to express opinions on whether the basic financial statements are presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and also in relation to opinion for the federal single audit and the state single audit, and also an opinion on compliance related to the major programs contained within the federal and the state single audit. We're also engaged to provide a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grants, and also on internal control over compliance with respect to those major and state award programs. So executive summary, again, Leslie will be going and Dan will be going into a little bit more detail, but we have issued an unmodified or a clean opinion on the financial statements, which means that everything is correctly stated in accordance with our accounting standards, and there were no findings reported on internal control and over compliance. For the federal single audit, we also issued clean opinions on the major federal programs that we tested and no findings or significant deficiencies in internal control or compliance. And then the same thing for the state, very boring, which is what you want, clean opinion over the major state programs and also no compliance findings or significant deficiencies in internal control or compliance. I think that's it for me. So Leslie, I'll turn it over to you.
So good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start my financial highlights section by just going over the various exhibits within the CAFR. And I'll share with you some page numbers so that you can certainly reference back to the CAFR at some future date. And I'm going to start with exhibits 1 and 2, and those are found in the CAFR on page 12 and 13. And I'm going to start with the governmental activities. And so the governmental activities column is under the full accrual basis of accounting. So it includes your capital assets, your long-term debt. Net position as of 6/30 increased 125.7 million from 433.4 million to 559.1 million. Most of that increase is attributable attributable to your capital assets, which increased 117 million during the year, as well as your long-term debt decreasing by 16.2 million. The other column that you'll see on these two exhibits is your business type activities. Those include all of your enterprise funds combined. So that's your Hartford Stadium Authority, your Hartford parking facilities, and the golf course. Net position decreased in total by 523,000 from 19.5 million to 18.9 million. And then the last column on those exhibits is your discretely presented component unit of the city, the Hartford Parking Authority, and that is audited by another auditing firm, and it shows revenues and expenditures of 7.3 million for the year. The next exhibits that I'd like to go over are exhibits 3 and 4. They can be found in the CAFR on page 14 through 17 if you want to reference back. These exhibits are on the modified basis of accrual, and they're segregated by major funds, which we opine on separately. So I'm going to start with the general fund. Fund balance increased 17.2 million. From 12.6 million to 29.8 million. Budgetary expenditures were 28.5 million less than budgeted, and those savings were slightly offset by budgetary revenues being less than budgeted by 12.3 million. Tax collection rates went down slightly, I'm assuming from the pandemic, from 95% versus 96% from last year. We probably may see a similar dip in fiscal year 2021 as the pandemic continues. And then the other columns within these exhibits, your other governmental funds, I'm going to start with Capital Improvement Fund. That fund balance decreased 7.5 million to a negative 3.5 million. And showing a negative fund balance within this type of fund, we see a lot in our municipalities, basically due to timing of when your capital projects are expended versus when those funding sources are received. Your community development loan and grant fund balance decreased 106,000 to 2.4 million. Debt service fund decreased 17.7 million to 11.6 million. Your ed grants decreased 6.1 million to 1.6 million, and then the non-major governmental fund column in that exhibit is a total of all of your smaller governmental funds. There is a detail that makes up those balances that can be found on exhibit B1 and B2 starting on page 120 of the CAFR if you want to go reference back to that. Fund balance increased 3.3 million to 50.2 million. Moving on to the city's proprietary funds, and those exhibits are found in the CAFR on page 18 and 19. We're going to start with the enterprise funds. These are the three funds that were included in your business type activities. Hartford Stadium Authority, net position increased 47,000 to 585,000. Your Hartford Parking Facilities Fund, net position decreased 505,000 to 14.7 million. And then the golf course net position decreased 25,000 to 3.7 million. And then included in your proprietary fund exhibits are your internal service funds. And that column within that exhibit is a total of all of your internal service funds. But again, you can always see that detail in the back of your CAFR. The detail of your internal service funds can be found on page 127 and 128 of the CAFR. And just to highlight the net positions within those funds, workers' compensation fund, net position decreased 1.4 million to a negative 21.3 million. Liability and property damage fund, net position increased 999,000 to a negative 4.5 million. Metro Hartford Information Services Fund, your net position increased 838,000. So now there's a net position there of 838,000. And then for the medical funds, retirees net position increased 764,000. So now you have a net position of 764,000 in that fund. And then your actives net position increased 3.7 million to 6.7 million. And then moving on to the last couple of exhibits, Exhibit 8 and 9, that can be shown or seen on your in your CAFR on page 21 and 22. And that's related to your pension and OPEB trust funds. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit about the net position in those funds. So your main pension fund, your MARB fund, the net position decreased $38.5 million to 1.011 billion. The next three funds have no net position. Those are pay-as-you-go funds. Retirement allowance fund showed 18,000 in employer contributions and benefits paid. Your fireman's relief fund showed 59,000 in employer contribution and benefits paid, and then the police benevolent fund showed 201,000 of employer contributions and benefits paid. And then your OPEB trust fund, which is included in this column, net position increased 241,000 to 22.8 million. And the detail of all of these pension and OPEB trust funds can be seen separately in your CAFR on pages 130 and 131. But they're also in the notes to the financial statements on page 66 and 67. So either place you can find that detail that matches the slide. And then lastly, the column on agency funds, you have 874,000 held for other groups. And that column in the CAFR is going to change slightly with the new GASB 84. And Vanessa's going to talk about that briefly at the end of our presentation. And then just lastly, I kind of wanted to highlight some of the footnote disclosures for you and the required supplementary information within the CAFR related to your OPEB liabilities and pension liabilities. For your net OPEB liabilities for the city plan, you have a net OPEB liability of 395 million, and that's 0.69% funded. And I've just let you know where in the CAFR you can find that information, and that's on page 104. On the Board of Ed plan, the net OPEB liability is 22 million, and that's 47.70% funded on page 105. And then on your the net pension liabilities, your MRF plan is 500.5 million, which is 66.88% funded. The RAF, PBF, and FRF plans, 1.9 million, and those are pay-as-you-go, as I mentioned. The 415M plan had a net pension liability of 154,000. That can be shown or seen on page 98. And then you also have your cost-sharing plan that you have with the state of Connecticut. That liability, or your allocation of that liability, is 34.9 million, and that's currently 72.69% funded as of 6/30/19. they're one year behind in the state plan in terms of reporting. Does anybody have any questions on the financial highlights before I send it over to Dan to talk about the single audits?
This is Bob White. Quick question on the debt service fund.
Okay.
Pardon?
Go
On
ahead.
the debt service fund, I noticed that there was a substantial decrease. Do we know what the reason for that is?
That's the paying down of your debt service. So as you're paying down debt, if those expenditures are more than what's going into the fund, you'll see that decrease.
That's a good thing. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, Dan?
Good morning, everyone. So for the federal single audit, total federal awards expended in fiscal 20 were approximately $114 million. The major programs we tested were the Child Nutrition Cluster, which includes the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, and Summer Food Service Program. The Women, Infants, and Children Special Supplemental Nutrition Program, and the Title I grants to local educational agencies. And as Vanessa noted previously, we issued an unmodified opinion on major program compliance with no compliance or internal control findings. For the state single audit, total state awards expended were approximately $484 million. The major programs we tested were magnet schools, distressed public library repairs, early care and education, school readiness in priority school districts, which we call school readiness, the reimbursement towns, private tax exempt property, which is payment in lieu of taxes for private colleges, LOCIP, which is the local capital improvement program, and the Urban Acts Grant, which was a multi-year infrastructure grant related to the replacement of the city's emergency dispatch system and mobile and portable radios. Again, like the federal single audit, as Vanessa mentioned, we issued an unmodified opinion on major program compliance with no compliance or internal control findings. So in connection with our audit report, we issue a letter provided to the mayor and the Court of Common Council that was dated December 27th, the same date, with all of the following required audit communications. First, there were no new standards adopted in the current year. Significant estimates included useful lives of capital assets, allowance for uncollectible receivables, the net pension liability, the net OPEB liability, claims and judgments, and investments measured at fair value, not based on market prices. And further, we were pleased to note that there were no disagreements with management, that management did not consult with other accountants, there were no difficulties encountered in performing the audit, there were no uncorrected misstatements, and no independence issues arose. So for the management letter, we issue a separate management advisory letter that was provided where we as auditors would include comments and recommendations for improvements that we noted throughout the audit process. This year, there was only one comment related to cybersecurity threats in connection with the ransomware attack. So this is intended to be an overall advisory comment on the importance of proactively assessing and managing operations and IT environments in anticipation of cyber threats. And we recommend annual security and vulnerability risk assessment should be performed that identifies any potential exposures. And additionally, we recommend strengthening employee cybersecurity awareness through focused training. Additionally, I want to touch that in the prior year management advisory letter, we had a comment regarding the Board of Ed financial close process, for which we noted the Board of Ed is continuing to improve their processes as it relates to fiscal year end close, And with the exception of delays due to the software access from the ransomware attack, the Board of Ed was more timely with the process in the current year. And as such, no advisory comment was included in this year's letter. And then lastly, we also wanted to mention the wording in the management advisory letter that we note that it should be read in conjunction with our report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance. These are the reports that are included in the federal and single audit. So in the federal single audit report, it's on page 11. In the state single audit report, it's on page 9. So this, if any findings were deemed to be a significant deficiency or material weakness, which is a higher level of finding than we thought the cybersecurity threat advisory comment was, they would be included in those reports. And as previously mentioned, we did not have any compliance or internal control findings. Also, sorry about the dog barking in the background.
He has something to say about this audit. And so far, we'll take those comments as positive. I do have one question before we move on to the GASB standards that are coming up in the upcoming years.
Sure.
So I see that we have no audit findings with the city, but if I was to look to the auditors and say, if you had a forward-thinking approach to finding or areas of areas that may need some attention or, you know, would rise to occasion. So they may not rise to a finding occasion. What is there anything that you would like to bring to this board's attention and the city?
Only the management letter comment that we had on cybersecurity at this point is the only comment.
Okay.
Any other comments before I move on to the GASB standards?
Kim, can I ask a question about the
Of course.
the management advice? The so the city has been in the process of you know, taking a pretty comprehensive look and project to make the IT systems more secure and you know, that came out of last year's audit as well. And I'm wondering, does this year's management letter, is it suggesting additional work or simply a continuation of that effort, which I think is like probably a multi-year, you know, multi-year initiative. I'm just trying to understand how that relates to what they're already working on and whether it's a recommendation to go further or stay the course.
So it's to stay the course. I know, and Leanne can speak to this more specifically, but they've put a lot of policies in place. In terms of cybersecurity, it always needs to be front of mind. I think the annual assessment is also, you know, always a good idea. So I think that the management letter comment was more of let's keep the pulse on that. Let's continue to improve those processes as we go forward. So I think the improvements that the city has been making are on track and should be continued.
Okay, that's good to know that it's not a fact of they didn't do everything you commented on in the past and that led to a ransomware. That progress has been made, but there's still more to be made in this
Correct.
area.
Kim, if I could just add, I know that this committee has been concerned about the management letter from prior years, which mentioned the laptop encryption and the disaster recovery plan. But
Yes.
Our IT department was able to get all of those older laptops encrypted. They
wow.
had most of it done before the audit finalized in December with a handful left. And as of this morning, those laptops have been encrypted per our IT director, interim IT director. Also, the city's on the verge of finalizing the disaster recovery plan. The draft has been drafted, and the city's in final with the new location. So once that agreement is executed, the city will start moving the equipment, finalize the draft, and the disaster recovery plan will be put into action. And then MHIS has also drafted an incident response plan. So they're definitely moving forward. You know, the cybersecurity attack in September was definitely a wake-up call. You know, but cybersecurity has always been in the forefront of MHIS's responsibilities. So definitely making forward progress there.
Perfect. When you meant, well, it's the echo, and I think it's with your connection. When you mentioned that the city is working on the disaster recovery plan, is that connected with the Board of Ed as well?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions from the board members? No. But before you move on, I do have one other question. And it is about industry-wide in financials. If I looked at page 6, and I look at the governmental-wide financials, that encompasses the entire city, Board of Ed, everything as a whole. And those are the type of financials I'm used to when I was in corporate versus working for the state. If I look down at the unrestricted net position and see those negative net position under unrestricted, so that's looking at everything from the GAAP financials, is the negative balances that we're seeing here, do you see that as a trend within towns, or is it a trend within distress municipalities?
I wouldn't say it was necessarily in distress municipalities. I mean, I know that we have seen negative unrestricted net positions in certain circumstances when there's a high level of capital assets. So their net investment in capital assets is quite high.
Yeah.
You do have a positive net position, which is good. That's what you would want to have.
Yep.
So that's how, you know, that's what my suggestion would be, Kim, to answer your question. Is that the negative unrestricted can sometimes be related to what other restrictions you have on that balance, but you want to, you know, pay attention to the total fund balance. I mean, total net position, excuse me.
Okay. That is it for my comments. And I guess we're ready to move on to the GASB standards.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the GASB issued, first I'll talk about GASB 95 that was issued in 2020. As a result of the pandemic, all of these standards were, the implementation date was pushed out a year. So I might be repeating myself for those of you that were here last year. Fiduciary activities statement 84 is probably the biggest standard that's going to impact the city this coming year. This is a new definition of what a fiduciary activity is. So what's going to have to happen is together with the city, we're going to look at the various funds of the city to make sure they still meet the definition of a fiduciary activity. And then also see if there's other activities in the city that do meet the definition that need to be brought onto the financial statement. So it'll just be a geography type of statement. You might see funds in different places next year. Statement 90 and 92 is probably not going to affect you. So I'll move on to next year, which is fiscal year 2022. I'm really just going to talk about Statement 87, which is a biggie, and we've already had discussions with the city and already started the process of inventorying these leases. So what this statement is going to do, and this is just like the commercial world for FASB, is any operating leases, whether it's paying rent or receiving rent. So rather than having a rent expense or rental income, these arrangements are going to have to be brought onto the balance sheet as an asset and a liability. So what needs to happen is an inventory needs to be done, and then a calculation will have to be done over the term of the lease and the amortization. Similarly to leases in 2023, Statement 96 is very similar to the lease standard. This is for subscription to software arrangements. So this is a new one. So perhaps the city and the Board of Education, while they're inventorying their leases, they can start this process too, to inventory these arrangements, get us these agreements so we could start to accumulate these. And it's the same accounting. Rather than just an expense for the subscription, there's going to be an asset and a liability on the balance sheet. The other standards are not going to affect the city. And lastly, just to talk about CLA a little bit, if anyone has any questions, just to give you our thoughts on the merger. So as of January 1st, 2021, Bloom Shapiro was acquired by CLA. I was actually very involved in the discussions. CLA is a great firm. I know Jen could probably attest to that. They have the same values and culture that Bloom Shapiro had. And I've been at Bloom for 29 years. So I think it's a very positive change for everyone. It's a great opportunity for our employees and for our clients, a lot more resources for our clients. CLA has a very significant government practice. They're actually the largest auditor of states in the United States, and they have about 3,500 government clients. But really, there's only going to be positive changes for our clients. Your audit teams will stay intact. You'll still see the same familiar faces, just a lot more resources for the employees and for our clients. And that is all I had. Here's our contact information, just in case anybody has any further questions after the presentation. You can email us or call us. And I'll just echo what Leanne said about the audit. I think it was a challenging year for everyone, just getting used to remote auditing, but I thought that everybody really was very responsive to all of our requests, and it went as smooth as it can in a pandemic. So kudos to everyone.
Well, great news on completing this, and with all the challenges that took place, that's definitely a big lift. I knew it was. So good job to everybody. And Bloom, thank you. Well, CLA, thank you for coming forward with your presentation for the board today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are ready to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the status of the Board of Education special education study, and wondering if the superintendent is with us today.
Oh, here, I believe that may be her getting on now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she was scheduled to join at 10:45.
Okay. Hello, is that you, Superintendent?
That is me. Good morning, everyone.
How are you?
I am well, thank you.
Perfect. We are ready to move on to the next item of the agenda, which is the status update of the Board of Education's special education study. If you would please update the committee.
Yes, wonderful. Just checking in that everyone has got the memo that I submitted. It was a little lengthy, but I can dive into that now.
Yes, everybody should have that on hand.
Great. And so what I wanted to do with the memo was just have a little background information and then move forward with where we currently are. And last time we were together, we discussed potential programmatic enhancements and implementation so that we can either reduce the number of students that were being recommended for outplacement or bring students back. And what you see there are specific programs that have been recommended. One, as you can see, is to respond to the high cost of out-of-district placements. And there are specific foundational programming that we are implementing now, and that is what we had discussed before, a multi-tiered system of supports, making sure that if students are supported, for example, in the classroom in terms of their not only academics, for their social and emotional needs, and if that is done with fidelity, then there would be a less amount of students that are being recommended for special education and outside of referrals. And so you can see there, that there are several programs, and one specifically that I want to raise is the bottom of page 1, which is, our efforts to serve more students in district, and that is through our STEP program. That is it's a transitionary program. I'm not sure if everyone knows, but by law, we have to make sure that we service students even after they, complete their 12th grade as part of, transitionary support. And so we've done some forecasting, and, we have an opportunity to serve some of our students in district. And then you see that in page 2, we have there's a proposal for tier 2, tier 3, and just to refresh our memory, tier 2 and tier 3 are programs and supports for students that need just a higher level of support, more intense support. And, I gave the example here of a student that, could be identified for special education early on in first grade and requires an outplacement, and, it could be up to $840,000, for example. And so having a program in-house with a startup cost of, $500,000, for example, would decrease over time our reliance not only on outplacements, but the amount of money that we would, have to pay, while making sure that our students are serviced in their respective communities. 2 other programs there. One is the Step Back program, and that is more of a transition back in. It is really hard once a student is outplaced and begins to meet, success. It's really hard for the family specifically to want to transition a student back in, but there are times in which they do when, there's a lot of intervention and support from the district about the opportunity that exists internally. And so, the Step Back program would allow us to provide a programming for students that are transitioning back to us. And lastly, this is not one that we have talked about, but it is one that we have noticed a need for, not just locally in Hartford Public Schools, but, throughout other districts as well. And that's just the school anxiety and the school avoidance that oftentimes presents, and our students, just don't come to school for a variety of reasons, but tend to fall under either what is called a 504 plan, which is, it could be a medical related diagnosis and or mental health related supports that are needed, or through special education, the individualized education plan. Either way, it is additional supports that have to be provided, and it's hard for students that are struggling under this, school avoidance challenging circumstances for students to come in, and oftentimes they are outplaced as well. And so we want to be able to establish a program. We've done less work in terms of trying to cost some of this for this program out, but it is something that we know is a need, and the backdrop of COVID, makes us, project that the school avoidance might be something that we will see more of, given that, students have now spent more time outside of school. The next overview in the memo is about the restructuring. And I'll summarize by just giving an update that we do have someone now that is overseeing multi-tiered system of supports. We did not have that position before. We have implemented that position, and that person has already begun working with, not only the academic, but, the social support, the student supports department as well. Followed there, you see some other moves that we're looking to make in order to restructure the Office of Student Supports. Currently we have in-district directors that spend a lot of time just sitting in PPTs, almost like overseeing PPTs. And, we believe that that is something that does not need to happen at the director level. And so we're looking to make some shifts there, just again, to be able to support more so the school level staff, right? Right now, we see that our special education teachers, for example, are not receiving as much professional learning as we would like them to. And so we want to make sure that we leverage and redefine those director level positions to be able to support on the ground. More on the technical side, this is more toward the bottom of the page where you see out of district billing. We have implemented additional processes, and this is in collaboration with the finance team and our senior executive director who oversees student supports does meet weekly with the out of district team, out of district placement team, as well as the finance team. And so this has now resulted in a cadence and a better handle, if you will, of not only the billing that is happening, but whether or not students are actually accessing the programs. I know that there's a lot in this memo, but it's essentially it's capturing programmatic improvement while being mindful that there's still a lot for us to determine, especially given COVID, right? There are students that are not reporting to their outplacement. And so, we have to be cautious in terms of making any projections as to whether or not students are going to want to transition back. And I think because of that, we feel that it is not the best time for us to issue an RFP. We don't yet have a handle on, for example, the learning loss that has taken place for all of our students, especially our students with learning exceptionalities. And so I am very cautious to say let's issue an RFP when I don't know yet what the assessments are going to call for at the state or federal level, and I don't want to be in a situation in which we make strategic decisions without, the entire, data set, if you will. I'll pause here for any questions. I know that's a lot of information in the memo, and I know it's very in the weeds, and it relates to special education, and not everyone has that background. So I'm mindful of that. So I can answer any questions.
Any questions from the board members?
Yeah, it's Mark.
Hi, Mark.
There's a lot to digest in the memo, and I'm fully aware of the COVID impact on school systems and certainly in urban areas more so than most. That said, rather than getting into the weeds, as you call them today, what I would like to do is I'm going to forward Julian a series of questions that I have based on the memo that deal systemically with the data that you could provide that leads us to the systemic changes that you are referring to. Because as you know, the percentage that Hartford pays of its budget, which of course is roughly 50% of the total city of Hartford's budget when you add in all the numbers, I think is 15 to 17%, if not higher, is much higher than other districts. Now that could be driven, and probably is driven, a great deal by the open choice model, and those questions I'll get into through Julian. But focusing on the special education programmatically, as you are doing now, which is great, which will take time because it just does systemically to change, to start from or modify from existing to new, if you will, or modified, is a culture change. But again, the data is there for us to digest, I think. And the concern I have is that some of the data may lead to the Hartford delegation, legislative delegation, seeking legislative changes for open choice models relative to special education, dealing with accountability and transparency. Hartford is obviously a major open choice model, the major open choice model, due to Chef and a variety of other reasons, with other districts downstate seeking that open choice model. Well, be careful what you wish for, especially if the open choice model does not have accountability built into it so that the sending district can fully participate in the PPTs of the students being sent, and the possibility of the fiscal accountability associated with that. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that now, but being from the education field and knowing special education from Connecticut as I do, and how fractured it is, the questions I ask Julian in writing, I would hope he can forward to you, Madam Superintendent, for consideration and response, only to raise to the fore possibly some of the areas that you may need assistance in legislatively, that where your hands may be tied. Because I do see over the years that we look at the goal, but forget how to get there and how it can be very cumbersome, and how there needs to be legislation to assure smooth transitions without burdening the regular education population of the sending school district. And Hartford's regular education population, from a monetary standpoint, one could argue, is being hurt because of significant percentage of dollars being allocated to special education students, which they deserve rightly, programmatically, but we want to make sure that they are getting the programmatic needs met with the necessary transparency and accountability that goes along with that. So thank you for the work, and hopefully you'll be able to look forward to the questions in good faith and to be able to respond to them with your team.
Yes, if I may respond, absolutely. And Mark, I first want to just thank you for acknowledging that, you know, our context, the urban context, is it's so challenging. And then you overlay the open choice, the choice ecosystem in which we operate in. And that there is organizational culture change also that is at play here as we're thinking about, a district that was autonomous, right? Just a reminder that Hartford Public Schools at one point had a reform model pre many of us that was an autonomous structure. That means that every school did respond to student needs differently. And so some would outplace more than others. And that is no longer, that is the ship that I'm trying to turn around, if you will, in terms of having, more systemic, systematized approaches to the work, including, this, our response to, the responsibility that we have to meet student needs. The other piece is that there is agreement. Mark spoke about, legislatively examining shifts here, knowing that we are at the mercy, and I don't say that in any way to insinuate that our neighboring districts are not meeting, don't have good intentions to meet the needs of our students. Please do not misunderstand me. But it is really hard to, to pay a bill and not oftentimes not be part of the design or the implementation of the individualized education plan. And the other piece, Mark used the word accountability. We are right now in the process, for example, of still, doing our due diligence with regard to residency verifications, right? Because as the sending district that is responsible for paying the bills for students that are special education serviced by other operators or in open choice districts or by out of district placements, the responsibility relies on us. Financial responsibility relies with Hartford Public Schools. And we have to do our due diligence to ensure that, residency requirements, for example, are being met. And that is cumbersome, and that is something that, we're still in the middle of. So it is multi-layered, multi-complex, in addition to the internal work that we have to do. So I look forward to Mark and anyone else's, questions, and we'll certainly answer them and provide any data that is needed.
I'd like to weigh.
Yes, who is, I'm sorry.
I'd like to weigh in with a few questions. This is Christine Shaw.
Hi, Christine.
Thank you for this report, Madam Superintendent. This does represent, I think, a lot of progress on questions that we've been posing over the course of the past year. I'd be interested in seeing the questions, Mark, that you plan to advance. I think it would be constructive if the questions of all the members are included in that, so that there could be one response from the superintendent. And I'm sure given your background, Mark, questions will likely cover mine, but just wanted to put forth a few that came to mind during your presentation, Madam Superintendent. The first is that I know that there had been discussion in the past around benchmarking certain components of that are really driving the costs. And so my first question relates to one, you've set out in your memo 4 proposed in-district programs. Have you aggregated the potential cost savings for each against what our current projections are if we remain on the current path?
No, that is a challenge that we're having, given that we don't know whether or not our current students that are outplaced are going to continue to attend, right? Some of them are not attending now. And so until we are able to get through this year, and have, for example, our annual planning and placement team meetings, that is a very hard target for us to narrow in on. So that's work that has to continue to evolve.
Okay, so and so my second question relates to whether, if you were to advance less than all four of these in-district programs, it would be helpful to know, what the cost benefit, the pros and cons, the cost benefit analysis would be for each. It's also known as a sensitivity analysis to figure out what combination of these programs would lead to different results. And in terms of the process of projecting, you may not have precise information about enrollment, but I think historical data might be a good substitute. But there are ways of at least getting some idea of what the aggregate impact of these proposals would be. And so I just offer that. This another question I have relates to the last paragraph of your memo, which talks about the delay for issuing an RFP. Now, is this the RFP that is this the RFP that is intended to capture the deeper analysis that we've been discussing?
Yes, I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Right. And I guess I would just register my concerns about putting this on hold. I mean, I understand we are in extraordinary circumstances with COVID, but as long as I've been a designee on MARB, which is coming up on a year, we've been talking about the necessity for a deeper dive on these issues. And so I would just register some concern about an indeterminate delay in issuing this RFP. And the last thing I would say is that, the kind of the benchmarking piece, and I think it is important, the points that both Mark and you made about the implications of an open choice program, and there are different challenges for an urban school district like Hartford. And so I don't think we should focus our analysis as if these are widgets where one unit of special education services in Hartford is the same as in another, because of the dynamic and the multiple needs that are being addressed for these students. But I do think there has to be some kind of objective quantifying of the elements of these different services so that we can begin to get a sense of what it is a district is paying for. Because I recall some data that you had shared months ago about the per pupil cost of comparable services just being, just the projected growth just being very, very concerning. And so, so I really would counsel in favor of, at least if there's going to be a delay in issuance of an RFP, it should be a delay for a finite period of time. I do think that there are various ways to project these component costs that can guide better decision making or informed decision making, and we're making progress, and this memo does represent progress. But from an analytical standpoint, which ultimately should guide our policy direction, there's still a number of areas where professional guidance is warranted.
Yeah, so I do have a response. I think last time that we shared projections, it was work that we had done in collaboration with the school finance project. And so that led to this deeper work on the programmatic side. And the next level of work was to determine exactly how many students, we projected to be outplaced. And that's really hard. Well, two things: how many students would be outplaced, or how many students would be, determined to be in need of special education. And that is data that it's hard for us even internally to project. And then, of course, it's nearly impossible for us to project when students are not with us in the district. So I understand the concern that you're raising and the recommendation you're making with regard to the assessment. I just want to lift the difficulty, right? That any entity that we consult with will identify as well. So I think we're looking at two different things. One is based on the current students that we have, what are those projections, which is work that, we did in collaboration with the School Finance Project, and we shared. But the other one is it's more elusive, if you will, and certainly is more so now in COVID. So I hear you, and I'm trying to, as I'm responding, thinking out loud how we would go about that.
So is the struggles, Superintendent, are the struggles because you're in COVID and the manpower and the difficulties that you're having in the pandemic environment, or are the struggles that if we put the RFP out there and hired somebody to do this work, and all of the onus and the resources should be on the hiring vendor to do the work? I do know that they'll have to work hand in hand with your group, but which one or both causes the reason for a delay on moving forward with this information?
Yeah. So put COVID aside.
Okay.
Making projections about which students and how many students will need special education services outside of the current students that we have identified is really hard, right? Because what we're trying to say is if we stay and we do not change to Mark's comments before, the culture, the way we program, then we can say that we're going to increase I don't know what the figure was, but by $10 million, at least $10 million every year. However, if we do all this other work, as I outlined in the memo, we will likely, curve the amount of students that are, being referred to special education, but to make a prediction as to by what percentage that is. That's just not the way, it works in education with people because, we have, as you know, or you may not know, a high transiency rates. We now enter COVID, and we don't know what that would mean to identification of students in terms of their learning, their academic needs, and or their emotional needs. And so I think it's both. It's just a complexity of what we're dealing with, one, and then you overlay COVID. And so I don't know that that's any helpful in answering your question, because we're talking about two different things. What are the projections based on what we already know? And we've done that. And then what do we think is going to happen next? And that is really, really hard because of COVID. And because of just the nature, right? It's hard for us to say 20 kids. We're not gonna identify more than 20 kids this year, right?
But in doing this, in doing this, I understand it could be hard, but it could be that we tackle this within layers, and which area is the one that elevates to the highest risk and the highest cost, or showing as you had noted that we have certain areas we want to focus on. I don't think you can tackle it all at once. I do think that we could continue to make progress, and to do that and to be able to tie it to financial, the per person cost could then be projected out as to, if we have 5 students that classify as this category, here's the cost. If we have 10, and so it could be tiered and range based on cost.
I see.
Kind of no different than when what I look at it from a financial perspective, and Mark, you're more of an expert in Christine than I am in this area, but I am the numbers person. And from a financial perspective, when we look at a town that's distressed or a city that is distressed, we look at those areas of where we can make the shifts and the biggest impacts. And you know, some of them, it's going to be a multi-year approach, is what. And then once it doesn't feel like you're trying to tackle all of this at once, when that's totally, it can't happen, right?
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Especially given that we are in a choice ecosystem, and so what we are projecting, you know, outside of Hartford Public Schools, we would be doing it blindly,
right?
Because we don't own the IEP. We just pay for the IEP.
Right. You know, we do appreciate you coming forward to this meeting today. We do appreciate that you have progressed in doing some work. But we want you to know that we're here to help you and help the city in this area, because we do know, knowing that the city already had financial stability issues, if the Board of Ed, you know, has a specific budget, you need these budget dollars for other things if these programs are built, or and the data will help drive it. And that's where I think Christine's point is.
I completely agree.
Yeah, we're not trying to put a monumental lift on top of you. We're not.
No, I completely agree, and it is necessary. Okay. And you know, it is not an internal you know, lens only. I think that's the challenge here. And so you know, the RFP will then just look at Hartford, and I don't know how helpful that would be, given that Hartford lives in an ecosystem of choice. Right? So, you know, say we project wrong, and then what happens? It feels impossible in terms of the projections. If we look at it from the lens of other than what we already know about our current students, if that makes sense, because to forecast out how many students will be outplaced or identified as special needs, I don't know how that would be done, but
and that's when I think that putting the RFP will help you get expertise in this area of the specific items that you want to tackle. And you know, the RFP will then tell a vendor would then come forth and say, here's what I can do for you. And I think that might be what you need.
Yes. In terms of the RFP from a technical perspective, yes, I understand that. It's
okay.
Again, right, just special education and the continuum of support. I don't know of a district locally or you know, across my national network that is able to predict, or a consultant that is able to predict, you know, how many students you're going to have in special education, unless you're a very small district and, you know, your students are with you from the beginning to the end. That is definitely not the case in Hartford, given our transiency, but also, right, the open choice context in which we live in. So,
but what they can do is they can look at the data of the past, right? And you know what the cost factor is, and you have the history of the past, and then they can start to trend the classification of those students that you already have, and get a high and a low, right?
Yeah, and that information we have. That's what I was referencing earlier, that we did that work with the school finance project, and I can send that information. I mean, we've looked at all of the potential labels and how many of those labels are outplaced, how many are internally, how many are in open choice, right? So that data we have forecasted out at a low and at a high. I can share that with the team again,
because they have the first. Okay, right, and they had I do recall that it had a large, like, I don't remember. Do you remember the number off the top of your head? 25% increase?
I would have to dig it up myself.
That's okay. Okay. So we can bring that back again.
Which now, right, so that was pre-COVID.
Correct.
And now we would have to, so maybe that would be an opportunity then to re-engage with the same team that we worked with before, and perhaps do some calibration, given that the numbers certainly look different now. I mean, they're lower now in COVID.
Okay.
Only as it relates to Hartford School students, right? We have not yet looked at all the other operators. So perhaps that's a start, right? To see where did we leave off pre-COVID with the projections, and where are we now?
Okay.
I'm open to suggestions, but
this is Mark.
Yes.
Let me just try to put a fine point on what I'm trying to get at some point in time. And we don't, again, it's a very complex issue. We know in the state of Connecticut, we have a birth to 3 program with students in it for a variety of different reasons. Some of them physical, some of them academic, some of them for others. And then from 3 years old on up, the school system where that child resides, the district educationally owns them. That type of transition, when you say, and this is, I don't need a comment as much as where I'm coming from, when there is a continuum from a birth to 3 to a 3 to 22, and assume no transiency, and I know Hartford's a transient district, but let's set that aside for a second. Systemically, to identify students at a pre-K level, and I know the percentages, you have to share with me the percentages at a later date of how many students are enrolled in pre-K services, to identify at pre-K level students that may be in jeopardy for special education services can be done and is done in certain school districts. The resources are there. Don't know if Hartford has those resources, those programs, et cetera. If they don't, well, those are the issues that maybe an RFP would find out. So that projection probably can be done based on the data that we presently have, exclusive of the fact that let's assume that 60% of the students are pre-K, 40% are not. Well, then that raises another programmatic issue of you don't know what 40% of your population is walking through the door in kindergarten. So that creates an issue for us to examine. And then, as you said, identification is going to occur at an early age, probably kindergarten, first grade, whether or not he or she, the child, needs services, and what services should be provided, and programmatically, do we have those services? But trying to backfill for identification for projection purposes is complex in the nature of what's out there already. What do we need to go? Do we need to go door to door? Does there need to be community outreach? Does there need to be all of these things to help the school system identify what population it has that is going to impact its classrooms, whether they be special education, remedial education, et cetera. Second piece is, I'm a firm believer that some of these choice school districts that are receiving Hartford schools are getting students that need remediation, and they're PPTing them. They are not remediating them, they're PPTing them with a condition that they are, whether it's ADHD or ED or maybe bordering on LD, terms that I'm more familiar with. So I'm not sure that the receiving school district is and I hate to say this, but is programmatically looking to a child that they need to create some programs for, other than let's place them out. Those are things that need to be examined as well. That's an open choice issue. And I'm not indicting any receiving school districts, just saying it's a fact of life. They are under a tremendous amount of stress economically, programmatically, et cetera. They receive an open choice student that needs remediation. It's taking too much time, effort, energy, and money. What do I do? If they weren't PPT'd in Hartford, how many are being PPT'd in the receiving district and then either being outplaced or what have you? Those are the types of data and things that needs an examination from the ones that are staying in the district, not open choice. How do we identify to be able to project or be able to create? To the ones that are open choice, how do we make sure that everybody's accountable to that child educationally, fiscally, and programmatically? There are holes all over the place. To nobody's fault, it just is. So we need to find out where the holes are, and they're not going to be filled in 1 year, but they're going to, if we identify them without indicting anybody, but identifying the necessities, then we can honestly say, which may need some legislative intervention, we have now identified the needs of special ed students in a fully open choice model. And in addition, in an urban setting where only 40% of the students are going to pre-K or 70%, because there's an impact of 30%, do we need community intervention grants to do things? If you get the idea is we've uncovered, along with the superintendent in her good faith, significant issues in Hartford because it's unique. Right. But as other districts want open choice, as I read, and I said, be careful what you wish for, they're inheriting, should they legislatively move forward with this, they're inheriting issues that need to be addressed before the legislature moves forward for open choice in New Haven or Bridgeport or Danbury or whoever wants open choice. And those are the types of things that I think we're going to need to take time to address, either through the RFP process and hopefully through some of the questions I may put down in writing that would cause some thought process to occur. So those are my thoughts for the day, and I'll shut up now.
Now, I have one other suggestion, and I don't know if the MARB would want to entertain this, but the other thing is so in the past when we talked about the RFP so that we could get the study, and we came forward with this study, it would be helpful. Now, I'm thinking about other towns that are in distress that we have helped with, and the other thing that is coming to mind is, would it be helpful for the superintendent to have a consultant that the MARB hires to focused on the Board of Ed, and there is a book of business that we request of the consultant to help us complete. Mark, Bob, you're familiar with the Mike Malone model that we did in West Haven, and to help with the pension side of life. I just want to bring that to the table.
Well,
and the thoughts from the superintendent.
Yeah, right. You don't want people bumping into each other at.
No. It's just offering help or assistance on a specialized model.
Yeah, I do think that from a MARB point of view, a consultant that focuses on special education in an open choice environment, pitfalls and promises, or whatever you want to call it, narrowly focused may be an advantage to the superintendent because it is unique, and right. it does come with significant fiscal impact and programmatic need. So maybe a consultant that can focus on that.
Correct. That's what I'm referring to.
Would be a benefit, but I'd let the superintendent speak for her teams.
Yeah, so, Mark, you described a highly complex system that Hartford just happens to be at the center of it. I wonder if by only making this a Hartford issue, I don't even think that we're going to get at addressing Hartford's issues by just looking at it from the Hartford lens, honestly speaking, right? This is so reliant on there are so many interrelated pieces to this. So sure, we can look at it through the Hartford lens, and I think we'll be missing the fact that, just the open choice model there. These are the unintended consequences, right? Operationally of having an open choice, a choice ecosystem. And we can explore and we can, have the consultant. And I just wonder if it's going to be, should this be a broader examination? I know it's unique because of the Hartford, because of the regional. I didn't even say Hartford. The regional choice district is unique because of that, and we're at the center, but we're not the only ones impacted here, right? So I just want to lift that as well. I know our because of the amount of students that we have, and the rate of identification, that only doesn't happen because of we over-identify in Hartford, right? There are others that are doing the same thing that we have to pay for. So we need a consultant to say that. I agree that we need formally someone to say that, so that it could trigger, right, what Mark was talking about, right, legislative action and policy. But I wonder if we are missing an opportunity to cast a wider net. Mark talked about, birth to 3. Some of our students never stepped foot in our district, right? They register directly through the magnet operator.
I just don't want to move off of the lens of what the focus is, which then also leads to the financial side. And so, you've identified, and you can see that in the data in the past based on the financials and the cost factor that it's costing you, that this could become something that is not sustainable. And so, it's program, it is an issue, and I just think that I'm not trying to not focus on Hartford. It's a Hartford issue from a financial perspective as you go forward. So if we don't make small changes now, it's going to impact the future.
I wonder, do we have the possibility to somehow bring in folks from SDE to be part of the discussion?
Okay.
So I think that, because I understand, I think what I hear the superintendent say, and Mark has alluded to as well, is that there is a programmatic question that feeds into the financial question. And I think that where this board's focus is on the financial.
Yes.
But there are programmatic questions here that relate to open choice, that relate to special ed in particular, that I think need to get looked at in a broader policy complex. And so I think that we should bring in, I don't know who the right person is at SDE, but I wonder if there is a role for them to help us and help the district sort through this issue a little bit more.
Because programmatically, right, we are not getting at the root cause. The memo that I gave you speaks and gets to programmatic implementation in Hartford Public Schools. It's a financial issue for Hartford because we have to pay for the bill.
Correct.
But all of that is happening outside of our control.
Which I think is why you wanted to shift the model that you have into a more in-district model, at least for part of it.
For our students, right? Not for
right.
the students that are owned, right? Because that would be violating federal law. That parents have a choice to send their kids wherever they want. Which
right.
I think to a comment Mark had made in our previous, MARB meeting, that these are all the other elements of the choice ecosystem. So I perhaps, an SDE lens, while also maybe stepping back and re-engaging the the folks that did, the original projections. That's also something that I'm certainly interested in as well. And, even the consultant. I mean, I'm not saying let's not do it, obviously, but it's
Okay.
bigger than, right? It's bigger than.
Right. And I think we just need to make, again, baby steps towards where we need to be, and then be able to, just like the financial 5-year model, let's get to a model of what do we want to tackle. But I don't know if we have that at this time. I don't think we do.
Just so I'm clear on next steps, in addition to the questions that Mark will advance to the superintendent, is there consensus around the idea that's been proposed, the two ideas of engaging the State Department of Education as well as the consultant that Kim suggested? Is there any need for consensus in order to execute on that? I guess what I'm asking is, how do we move it from discussion to action?
I would agree.
Do we need a motion?
Why not?
There you go.
So, but just in terms of process, yeah, and I want to underscore Ms. Kenson's comments about not wanting to, to create an extraordinary burden for the superintendent, for the district. But I really do think we need to get answers to some of these questions, whether or not the costs are within the control of the district. They're borne by the district, and I just feel like we need to have some more resources to help us kind of get down to the bottom of what the drivers are, what the comparative numbers are, so that we can begin to fashion some solutions. I mean, this to me cries out for, once we get the results of this analysis, this cries out for, intervention and perhaps a legislative remedy. Because I don't think that this is sustainable, that the board is on a sustainable path, number one. And I also don't think that the board should bear the expense in the fashion that it has. So we need the data and the analysis in order to make the case.
I agree with you, Christine.
So do we have to have a motion in order for there to be, the allocation of resources from OPM's part, Kim, or is that something that
I think that
by consensus agree to?
Right. We would have to take it to the secretary as well, as she's in control of the funds, but definitely I think that we can make a recommendation. Julian, any other thoughts to make sure I'm not missing anything?
No, I think you framed it the way I would have, is that if the subcommittee, makes a recommendation to the secretary, and then that'll give her something to base a decision on the use of the funds.
Very good.
Yeah, I would offer that that Kim and Julian talk to the Melissa about this, and in consultation with the superintendent also, because I do think that some sort of a focused consultants activities would be a good thing. And I also believe with Matt that bringing SDE in as a separate resource to examine, because they do have special education consultants at Department of Education that can examine existing statutory language dealing with the issues that we're talking about, open choice, and others that the superintendent might feel are impacting her programmatically. That can be supplemental to the focused work of a consultant. So that dialogue I would think can occur between Kim, Melissa, and the superintendent, along with SDE, bringing them in to the with Matt being over there to help define everybody's role so that they're not pointing fingers, it's yours, it's mine, it's yours, it's mine. I think we got a pretty good handle of what we want to have happen, but I do think the superintendent needs to be an integral part to dot the i's and cross the t's.
I would agree. Okay, then we will, I will follow up, Julie and I will follow up with the secretary on this and superintendent, okay? And bring back something to this committee next month. Is that fair?
Sure.
Superintendent?
Yes, I look forward to the conversation and
Perfect.
keeping in mind the implications as to where we are currently in a district in the middle of a pandemic. So, those are all contextual factors that I will discuss.
Understand, totally understand. All right. Any other conversation about this agenda item for the Board of Ed and special this special education? I think that I'm ready to move on to the next agenda item. Okay.
I have a quick question for
Yes,
the superintendent. It's superintendent. Could you do you have a timeline or an estimated date on when you expect to have your proposed budget for FY22 released?
We have a board workshop in a couple of weeks. So by mid-February, we can give you, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. All right, so we will move on to other related business. I have two items that I just want to bring to the attention that we had completed the calendar for 2021 related to all of our meetings. Those have been posted to the website. And we did have to make some adjustments to the MARB meetings and hold a couple of them on Wednesdays for October, November, and December, so that we can make sure that the secretary will be available to attend if her calendar allows for that. And the next item I wanted to bring is the contact information for the board members was sent out. Julian sent that out, and we are looking for feedback on that. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Other than that, I do not have anything else under other related business unless any of the members do. Nope. Okay. Then shall we get a motion to adjourn today?
So moved.
I didn't see who's that said that. I'm sorry. Matt. Thank you, Matt.
Second, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Signa.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you all, and appreciate your time, effort, and City of Hartford.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.